I think they should, and I can just tell you, again, I guess this is kind of a fake news hat situation. Again, the hat is fake, the news is real. The fake hat doesn't even fit over my ponytail anyway. In the building, they think this team should be, and in some ways is, better than last year's. That they are, last year that they had fundamental issues that they were constantly trying to, like, you know, a leak in the boat that they were trying to fix, in that they did not have a left tackle all year long, and the receiving core was just wildly injured. And so because of that, they were trying to, you know, scotch tape things together. They don't feel that way about this team at all. And I think that's also evidenced by the fact that, rightly or wrongly, they could have added Breece Hall. They were like, yeah, we'll do it for a fourth, but not a third. Like, they think that they do have enough. So, and I agree with them in that. So I do think that they should believe they'll turn it around. I also think there needs to be very honest conversations about why are we not making the winning plays in the winning moments? Why are we making the same special teams mistakes and penalties? Why defensively did Bo Nix and the Broncos know what blitz was coming on the 3rd and 15? You know what I mean? What are the things we need to do? And they have 3 first ballot, no doubt Hall of Famers playing.
Right.
I would argue the only one who is right now playing his best that he can is Travis.
That he can.
Yeah, I mean, Travis is not playing like peak, but at 36 years old, he's second of all tight ends in yards. He's having a better year than he's had in 2 years. Chris Jones has not had a great year, and Patrick has had a great month plus, which gave him the numbers that are carrying him right now. But the last 2 weeks and the first 2 weeks, Patrick wasn't great. And so I think that's, you rely on your legendary players to, you know, do legendary things down the stretch.
First of all, I think very few NFL individual players or teams would feel like at 5-5 they don't have a chance. Like, I just think athletes in general, at this level, world-class athletes, they feel like every time they step on that field, they can win. We're looking at it, the outside world, thinking, oh, they've lost 2 straight, or, you know, this team's... They're not thinking that. They're not thinking that. So, and imagine now a team with their pedigree that's won 3 Super Bowls, that's been to, what, 5 of the last 6. There's no way they are or should be thinking this over. And then you gave some of the empirical evidence, like you gave some of the stats. They're the 4th best defense in the league, scoring defense.
All right, let's get into this. And that is a monumental factor, because it immediately relieves an enormous burden from the shoulders of Patrick Mahomes and the entire offensive unit. Here is the central point of my analysis, and here are the current Super Bowl odds. I want to be perfectly clear. I do not get lost in these numbers. I genuinely place very little stock in them. The only reason I'm even displaying them is to illustrate a shift. Prior to the Broncos game, the Chiefs were positioned at number 1, and subsequently, they dropped to 5th. At its core, this becomes more of a mathematical and analytical exercise than a pure football one. The fundamental question is this: do people sincerely believe the Indianapolis Colts possess a greater likelihood of winning the Super Bowl than the Kansas City Chiefs? It's a notion that I find difficult to process. It's simply an intriguing point of discussion. We will undoubtedly discover the answer when these 2 teams face each other on the field, right? We shall see. I actually believe the premise of this question is flawed, and this perspective might surprise some viewers. I do not think the Chiefs have some fundamental issue that they need to turn around. Their performance has not been categorically bad. The primary issue has been their inability to execute the decisive, game-winning plays in crucial moments. As Nick Wright has pointed out, Mahomes has not been the absolute peak version of himself. Although, I would contend that he has largely been the same player we've observed over the last 3 seasons. This is the Mahomes of 2023, 2024, and now 2025. He just hasn't been that transcendent, prime Patrick Mahomes that we all have etched in our memories. To be frank, you could make a similar argument about a handful of elite quarterbacks in the league right now. There's a general sentiment with players like Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson where you think to yourself, this doesn't quite feel like the dominant force we witnessed back in 2021. They still have brilliant moments and produce incredible highlights, but there's an underlying sense that something is slightly off. I feel this applies to Allen, to Lamar, and to Mahomes. It's a peculiar feeling. Weirdly enough, this was supposed to be Joe Burrow's season to potentially reclaim that mantle, but unfortunately, his campaign was cut short by injury. I'm not entirely sure what this broader trend signifies, to be honest. Mahomes has the longest sustained pattern of this slight dip, and we can certainly point to justifiable reasons. The absence of a key left tackle, injuries to his receiving core, all of these are legitimate, undeniable contributing factors. However, multiple truths can coexist. Yes, those were contributing factors, but it is also true that we have not witnessed Patrick Mahomes performing at his absolute best for a considerable amount of time. That is the present reality. I recently had a conversation with an individual whose opinion I greatly respect, a huge Mahomes fan, who expressed his belief that we are already witnessing the early stages of a decline in Patrick Mahomes. He pointed to aspects like the quickness of his release and the velocity on his throws. Let me be clear, I am not personally making that declaration. I still firmly believe that if you provide him with adequate support, he will be wildly successful and continue to post elite statistical numbers. I'm setting aside the critical moments, the ability to make the right play at the right time, and just focusing on the raw, bottom-line numerical output, the sheer statistics that make you say, wow, look what this guy is doing. This is where the analysis becomes complex because he does have a significant amount of support. He has weapons like Rashee Rice, Xavier Worthy, and Hollywood Brown. Travis Kelce is performing at a more than adequate level. The offensive line is holding its own. It is not a disaster scenario. He is not constantly running for his life, unlike the situations with the Raiders or the Chargers. My expectation for a quarterback of Patrick Mahomes' caliber is that when he faces pressure, say 12, 13, or 14 times a game, which is roughly the league average these days, he should be able to overcome it. The bulk of NFL quarterbacks operate within this range, with outliers at the very top and bottom. If your franchise quarterback is getting pressured 8 to 14 times, you consider that part of the game. The entire point of having a player like Mahomes is that he isn't supposed to require perfect conditions to succeed. That's what separates a Josh Allen or a Lamar Jackson. We are, however, observing a version of Mahomes who appears slightly less resilient than before. This was notably highlighted in the Super Bowl. He was pressured, but not at some historically insane rate. In fact, Justin Herbert has already had several games this season where he was pressured more times than Mahomes was in that Super Bowl. The difference was that Mahomes did a subpar job of handling that pressure. I want to be perfectly clear. I am not suggesting he should have single-handedly won that game. Immediately after the loss, I defended him, stating that I did not blame him at all and that the Eagles were simply the better team. I don't expect Mahomes to casually defeat a superior opponent. However, I did think it was fair to point out that in the critical moments where we typically see Mahomes being Mahomes, that signature magic was absent. It just wasn't there. That realization is a little strange. This is why I contrasted his performance with Jalen Hurts in that same game. Hurts was generally protected better, but on the occasions when his protection broke down, he made the plays. Hurts was able to scramble, rip off gains of 18 or 19 yards, and make accurate throws on the run. Mahomes, on the other hand, would avoid a sack but only gain a single yard, or he would be scrambling and throw a costly interception. It was not the performance we have grown accustomed to witnessing from him. Despite all of this, I remain a massive, massive believer in Patrick Mahomes. My mantra remains unchanged. Mahomes, Andy Reid, Steve Spagnuolo. I constantly repeat that trio. I am not prepared to start expressing doubt or saying that I'm losing faith in that foundation. For me to lose faith in Mahomes, he would have to experience a catastrophic, cliff-like decline in his abilities. And I suspect I will never lose faith in the coaching prowess of Andy Reid and Spagnuolo. They will likely retire before that happens. It's inherently easier to lose faith in a player whose physical skills may diminish than it is to lose faith in a brilliant tactical mind. I would never say that Spag's defensive schemes are dated or that Andy Reid has lost his touch. That is simply not a conclusion I am willing to entertain. So, it is indeed a fascinating situation. I am fully aware their record is 5-5, which is obviously not ideal. They had a demonstrably rough start to the season, navigating a slew of injuries. Mahomes is not performing at his personal best. Their defense, however, has been outstanding. I've heard some analysts point to offensive numbers, suggesting they are still ranked highly in certain categories, and even some of their defensive statistics appear inflated. When you completely dominate and annihilate teams like the Commanders and the Raiders, it skews the data. Congratulations on those wins. But when they faced functional offenses and competent defenses, the performance was not nearly as impressive. Therefore, if we examine their points per game, both offensively and defensively, we see they are ranked 9th in scoring and an impressive 4th in points allowed. Again, a significant portion of those defensive numbers are artificially boosted. Consider the game against the Baltimore Ravens, whose defense was completely decimated and circling the drain at that point. Lamar Jackson was also far from his best, a trend that has continued. Holding Russell Wilson to 9 points is fine, but it's not a monumental achievement. Shutting out the Las Vegas Raiders and scoring 31 is expected, given how awful the Raiders are. The same goes for limiting the Washington Commanders' offense to 7 points. Their defense has been a liability all season. However, when you look at the games against legitimate contenders, the picture changes. Against the Buffalo Bills, they gave up 28 points and only scored 21. Against the Denver Broncos, they managed only 19 points while surrendering 22. A decent defensive effort. But remember, the Broncos' offense was only able to put up 10 points against both the Raiders and the Jets. When the Los Angeles Chargers were relatively healthy, the Chiefs' defense gave up 27 points. Against the Philadelphia Eagles, whose offense has been inconsistent this season, even their most die-hard fans would admit to struggles, the Chiefs only scored 17 points. You could argue that the Eagles' defense has improved as the season has progressed, but early on, they were not considered elite, and the Chiefs' offense still sputtered. There are mitigating circumstances, of course. A key interception in that game cost them a potential touchdown, which could have made it 24 points. And they were also without both Rashee Rice and Xavier Worthy at the time. These are all fair points to discuss. It all comes down to how you balance these factors. If I were to do some quick back-of-the-envelope calculations, I'd estimate their true defensive level is closer to allowing 20 points per game, and their offense is probably in that same vicinity. The early season injuries undoubtedly weighed them down, but now they've received a boost from playing exceptionally bad teams. So, where does that ultimately balance out? Probably right around that 20-point mark. Maybe slightly lower or higher. For me, the key is to always scrutinize performance against quality opponents. You cannot simply rely on bottom-line numbers or point differential, though I acknowledge their utility. You must actively identify and account for outlier games. Beating the Las Vegas Raiders 31-0 is the textbook definition of an outlier. When I state that such a game means nothing to me for evaluation purposes, and Chiefs fans react with, "What are you talking about? That's crazy," I point to their subsequent performances against the Broncos and the Bills. They had back-to-back weeks dominating the Raiders and Commanders, and I maintained that it didn't move the needle for me at all, precisely because those teams are exceptionally bad. That take, which many Chiefs fans disliked at the time, proved to be 100% accurate, as they then lost to both the Bills and the Broncos. However, losing to those specific teams does not induce panic in me. Losing to Josh Allen and the Buffalo Bills is understandable. Losing to the Denver Broncos, who possess an elite defense and are currently the #1 seed in the NFL, is also understandable. The real cause for concern would emerge from different results. You start to panic if you lose to the Indianapolis Colts. You worry if you struggle mightily against the Dallas Cowboys or the Houston Texans. Even a game against the injury-ravaged Chargers that feels unnecessarily difficult, even if you ultimately win, should raise eyebrows. If you then get swept by the Broncos in the season series, that's when you say, "Oh man, we have a real problem." Therefore, I'm not convinced there is some major correction that needs to happen. The playoff picture does become mathematically tricky, but if you were a betting person, you'd likely wager that teams like the Chargers, with their overwhelming injury crisis, or the Mason Rudolph-led Steelers, or the inconsistent Ravens, will likely falter, keeping the door open for the Chiefs. There are pathways. Even in their victory over the Detroit Lions, where they held them to 17 points, the score could easily have been much higher if a few key moments had gone differently for Detroit. Conversely, the Philadelphia Eagles, who are technically ranked as a worse defense, 8th, allowing 20 points per game, have managed to stifle potent offenses like the Packers and the Lions, holding them to 7 and 9 points respectively, and they also held the Chiefs to 17. This adds another layer to the conversation. The discussions surrounding the Kansas City Chiefs are undoubtedly more complicated and nuanced than they have been at any point in the recent past. Yet, at 5-5, they still possess the 5th best Super Bowl odds and are very much in the mix. Before the Broncos game, they were number 1. Had they beaten the Broncos, they would have almost certainly maintained that top spot. If you want to approach this purely from a mathematical standpoint, you could argue that the mere possibility of them missing the playoffs must be factored in, justifying their drop in the odds. That is a totally fair and logical perspective. However, if we set aside the strict math and operate on belief, the belief that the Chiefs should be favored to win the Super Bowl, then a single loss to the Broncos is not nearly enough for me to demote them below teams like the Rams, Eagles, Bills, Colts, and on par with the Seahawks. I wholeheartedly disagree with that kind of drastic reassessment. But again, that disagreement is based on a qualitative football belief, not on mathematical probability. Those are my comprehensive thoughts on the matter. I would absolutely love to hear yours. What do you all think about the Kansas City Chiefs? Do you still maintain your belief in them? Do you think they possess the capacity to turn their season around? Or is there even anything significant to turn around, in your opinion? Perhaps they just need to continue playing as they are and trust that the close games will eventually start falling in their favor. Let me know your perspectives in the comment section below. I read every single comment, so whether you find yourself in agreement with me or you think I'm completely off base, let's get some lively discussions going. Let's engage in some spirited debates. But ultimately, let's remember to have some fun with it all. Please do consider subscribing to the channel. We are building a truly amazing community here, and I would absolutely love to see you become a part of it. My goal is to create a space where we all feel a genuine connection, something we're truly excited and proud to be involved in. I believe we are well on our way to achieving that. Also, please don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, as it genuinely helps with the visibility and the platform's algorithm. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you all next time.